Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Today, we are going to take a first look at what the hell is going on in the Toronto real estate market. The January numbers are in. It's the first real time we can actually look at a month in 2025 and get a sense of where we're at, how we're doing historically over the last 5 years. And then we're going to try and get some insights into where potentially we see things going right through at least to the spring. It's hard to think longer term right now in 2025 than the spring, given everything that's happening in the world. Yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation. My name is Ralph Fox. I am the broker of record and co-founder of Fox Marin Associates. And today we have none other than the lovely, the fabulous, the talented, the witty, the charming Corey Marin, my partner in crime, co-founder and broker at Fox Marin. Corey, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh my gosh. I'm kind of glad January is over. How about yourself?
This was the most insane January I think we've both ever had as brokers.
I know. And it started out going to be the best year ever, 2025. We're going to have such a great year. And wow, 2025 was off to a rocky start. If you look at everything that's been going on in the world, geopolitically, abroad, here at home in Canada, all kinds of things affecting the market, lots and lots of uncertainty, and then just everything going bananas at Fox Marin as well. So definitely an interesting month.
Well, we've also had a huge amount of listings coming out for this time of year, which is very unique. And we've been a little bit short-staffed, which has just made things a little challenging, which is totally okay. We can go with the ebbs and flows of that. And then we just have so many people in the pipeline for the spring that we've just done an exorbitant amount of walkthroughs and marketing meetings and listing presentations and pricing and calls. And then I don't know who follows us on Instagram out there, but we also got locked out of our warehouse one day. And we've just had a whole bunch of shit show things happening behind the scenes. The good news is that the January market numbers did come out a day early. So generally they come out, I don't know what day of the week it is, but they're supposed to come out this morning, but they came out yesterday. So we were able to prepare them for today's podcast. So you are getting this information as early as possible. Otherwise, we would have had to delay this particular topic to next week. So it's great that we've got these numbers. I'm excited to dive into it. I think there's a lot for us to uncover. And I think that I really also want to focus on anecdotally what we've been experiencing boots on the ground, because we had a lot of listings go through transactions already, and just the activity on them, the price point, the people, the sentiment, I think will be helpful for buyers and sellers they're trying to make a decision about what the freak they're going to do in 2025. So with that being said, let's dive into this. We have some slides for you here, which will just help give you a visual sense of what's going on. And then I want to talk about what's happening in January and then just look at that visually in comparison to where we were 5 years ago. And the reason 5 years ago is so important is because it was kind of the pre-COVID January of 2020 when things were more normal. And I want to look at what the market looked like before we were just thrown everything at it, including a global pandemic, a million gazillion interest rate increases, global uncertainty, immigration changes, political challenges, both north and south of the border. The market has had to be responding to so many things. So I think the last time we can look at normalcy is kind of pre-COVID. So it's helpful that we can compare January 2020 to January 2025. So let's talk about January 1st. So here, the first slide is going to give our viewers an idea of where things are sitting in the 416. So we're focusing on central and downtown Toronto here with these numbers. We're not focusing on the 905. Just want to be clear about what you're looking at. And we're going to focus on 4 categories, which we always do: detached houses, semi-detached houses, townhouses or row houses, and condo apartments. This particular chart here is comparing the average price from this month, or I guess last month now, January 2025 to January 2024. And you can see that detached houses are up in price about 1%. So they're about flat. Their valuations are coming in on average about the same as they did last January. Semi-detached prices are slightly down by 3.7%, also acknowledging that January is a slower month in the real estate market just due to seasonality and post-holiday blues. So you generally just don't see as many transactions happening. However, semis are already taking off, and we'll talk about that more. Townhouses or row houses are up in price about 5.1%. And condo apartments, still shocking me to this day, are just slightly down by 2.4% versus last year at this time. Now, we're going to see big picture when it comes to this on later slides, but we're just talking year over year differences right now. And sales volume, for those of you who are unfamiliar or have not tuned into the podcast before, are transactions moving through the system. How many deals are being done in these categories? So detached houses, 3.8% increase versus last year. So more people are buying detached than they did last year. Semi-detached, up 25% versus last year. Okay. Townhouses up 15%. And then condo apartments, not surprising, about a 15% decrease than last year. So less people are buying condos this January than they did last January. That is not surprising due to these two market worlds that we're living in. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we progress. Ralph, is there anything you want to add to this high level macro picture?
No, I think you're doing a great job.
Amazing. Okay. This is year over year. And now what we're doing is, this slide particularly, is combining all of the home types in one. So we're not looking at these particular asset classes. We're combining detached, semi, row houses. Everything is combined and lumped in here. So again, we're comparing this January 2025 to last January 2024. And you can see overall in the market, there's been less activity, less transactions. In fact, we're down about 8% versus last year. New listings coming online, the fresh new crop of stuff, the stuff that everyone loves to look at on their House Sigma app or their Realtor.ca app, the new shiny good stuff is up almost 50%. So if you're a buyer, you're looking at more inventory. It's more fun for you to look at the new product coming out or the new homes coming out. If you're a seller, you want to be more aware of the fact that you have more competition coming online. So it's not like you're just the only house going to market in Trinity Bellwoods. You're not the only condo being listed in Fort York. You're going to have multiple competitors. Active listings means how much inventory is just sitting 30 days over 30 days. So how much is sitting and not moving through the system? And this is part of our absorption rate calculation that we're going to talk about in the next slide, which I will for sure dedicate to Ralph because he always likes to be the one to talk about inventory. But active listings means stuff that's getting dusty and stale is up 70%. These are all really important data points that I really want you to start becoming familiar with, especially if you're new to real estate and you're trying to wrap your head around all of this stuff. So active listings up 70%. That's a lot. The average price overall is up 1.5%. Just a sliver, but it's something. And again, really surprising when you think about everything that we've gone through over the last 12 to 18 months plus. And then we're going to compare that to where we were 5 years ago. All right. So that's a really important metric I want you to focus on. And then finally, days on market. How long are things taking to sell? As flat, we're about the same. So it's an even keel when it comes to how long a listing takes to sell from beginning to end, inclusive of any conditions. Conditions being financing condition, a home inspection, a status certificate report, any of that kind of jazz. So this is giving you a nice look at how January is performed. And it's going to be very interesting to see when we start tracking January into February and March as we head towards the spring market, what these numbers start looking like in comparison to how much active inventory we have out there.
One of the things I like to clue in on, if you look at the new listings, January is always an interesting month because over the holidays, properties that don't sell in December often will get terminated and relisted in January. So that's something that commonly happens every year in Toronto real estate. But to see that jump of 48%, that's still a really big number, January 2024 over to January 2025. So that is something to keep your eye on, as well as active listings. So it's interesting to see potentially a trend line where you have transactions are down, so less sales are happening, but you've got an increase year over year of new listings and new active listings, while at the same time, average price has gone up slightly at 1.5%. So if this trend line continues, it's going to start to put downward pressure. Inevitably, it will have to put downward pressure on average pricing. So that's something to watch. Also interesting that in despite of all of this mishmash of numbers here, somehow average days on the market are flat. So I find that really interesting with all of the numbers just bouncing around here all over the place. So early start to the year, January's numbers, you always have to take it with a grain of salt just because the transaction volume is so low. But there are some burgeoning trend lines to keep your eye on, in addition to all of the external factors that can definitely affect the market, which we will continue to talk about on this channel as time goes on.
I like this fact you use the word burgeoning. Never heard you use that word before in my 13, 14 years of knowing you.
Corey, there's many surprises.
The last thing I want to talk about on this slide before we move on is in the new listing category and the active listing category. I want our viewers to understand that a large portion of those new listings are condos. So that's eating up a
Yes.
large portion of that. So I don't want you to think if you're like, oh, I really want, this is the year I'm going to buy a semi-detached house. There's tons of inventory out there. This is very much a macro picture or conglomerate of everything averaged. And a large percentage of that is condos. So that is a huge, huge thing because we've got to talk about the tale of these two markets as we continue through the slides. So let's talk about inventory, Ralph. This is your baby.
Yeah, it's really important if you want to understand any market to look at the basic fundamentals of supply and demand. I was talking about this earlier this week with our team. And there's no better way to get just a bird's eye view of a real estate market than looking at the absorption rate, something you really don't see talked about too much in the press. However, it is something that's really looked at by economists and analysts who are trying to understand what's happening in the market. And the philosophical principle behind the absorption rate, and we talk about this on this channel ad nauseum, is it deals with the idea that if you took everything that was on the market currently and nothing else came on the market at the current rate of sales, how long would it take everything on the market to sell through? So we do that by taking active listings and dividing that into transactions, which gives us the absorption rate. So we currently are at 4.36 months. Now that's all inventory types. And we know, and we've talked about this earlier today and ad nauseum on this channel, is that the condo side of the market is really, really weighing down these stats because there's just so much condo inventory sitting on the market. And so when you look at the overall market stats, you do have to take the numbers at a high level with a grain of salt. But if you look at the conventional wisdom between what 4.36 months represents, overall, that puts us in a balanced market conditions, which generally ranges between 4 to 6 months, and anything over 6 months is a buyer's market. Now, for frame of reference, the condo market is over 6 months, and the low-rise market is under 4 months. So overall, we're balanced, but it really depends on what segment of the market you're really driving into if you want to get a sense of the absorption rate and how the market is performing overall. It's a really, really great stat, and it's something we focus on all the time. Now, to give a little bit of context to this number, 4.36 months, we'll give you a couple other statistics. At the height of the market, I would have believed end of 2021, early 2022, just before interest rates started going up, we were seeing an overall months of inventory at 3.87 months or something like that. It was actually, I think it might have been a little bit lower. We're just sitting at about 3 weeks. And so that's the normal type of Toronto real estate market, in between 3 weeks to 2 months. So everyone's just writing for the hills. Oh my gosh, we're at 4.36 months, or oh, we're at 7 months. But to look back at how other markets around the world are operating, to give an example, and this is something we talk about with our clients and amongst our team, is if you look at Manhattan, they're currently at 188 days of the market, with an overall 7.8 months of inventory. That is really, really important to compare that to 37 days and 4.36 months. So, relative to most other large markets around the world, I don't know where you're tuning in from if you're watching us today, and we'd love to hear down below. I love it when we hear from people all over the world watching this, but we're still at a very healthy pace relative to other markets, and having more balanced market conditions, I think, is actually really healthy overall, as long as we can keep it at a little bit more static and less erratic inventory levels.
Which you'll see on the next graph where everything looks
Exactly.
very erratic.
Schizophrenic might be a better
Very
term.
much. And the other thing I'd like to just note here is I think it's a healthy comparison to compare us to Manhattan, not because I think Toronto's a mini Manhattan. That's not what I'm suggesting. It's just the cities are going through very similar issues in terms of the challenges that all the urban cities in North America are, in terms of like the push-pull with immigration, safety, crime, government turnover, stuff like that. So I think we're kind of in a very similar place that New York's in right now. So it is kind of makes it feel a little bit better that we are selling faster than New York, and that our months of supply are faster than New York. And that's, and we're obviously less expensive, but that's not a surprise. Okay. Remember I said schizophrenic, or you did? One of us did. This is an example of schizophrenic.
That was me, Corey.
I'm like, did I say it or did you say it?
No, I said that.
The whole month's been schizophrenic, so I'm not sure who said what anymore. So here we're going back. So we're going back 5 years ago and looking at sales volume, again, by these 4 home types that we're focusing on: detached, semis, rows, and condos. It's hard to see. So first of all, now the way we pull these stats comes from something now on our MLS system called Habitat. And this is the first time I've had access to this data this way. And I just personally, just feedback for them, find the coloring system very difficult to track what is what. So like there's a purple line, a navy blue line, a like medium blue, and then a turquoise. And I tried to indicate this in the table here for you. But I think the easiest way to think about it is like the biggest line where you see the most amount of volume is always going to be condos, because there's just more transactions in that category. And the one that you see the least amount of volume is going to be row houses and townhouses, because we just have less supply in that category in general, if that's just helping you wrap your head around looking at this graph. So obviously what you're seeing here is like a lot of volatility and then a response to every freaking thing that has happened over the last 5 years, including the pandemic. So we're comparing the amount of transactions going through the system January 2020 versus now January 2025. So a whole 5 years later, I can't believe that much time has passed already. And you can see that we're seeing less activity in the detached category by 16%, less in the row house category by 33%, and less in the condo category by 25%, but more sales transactions in the semi-detached area than we did pre-COVID. And there's a reason for that. So Ralph, I think this is the perfect time for you to sprinkle that into the conversation so we can talk about why we're forecasting semi-detached to be the new hot commodity moving into 2025.
Well, and this is, again, something we were talking about in December, but what had happened as of December 15th is a new government policy by the Liberal government to spurn more demand, I guess, into housing, is they increased the CMHC guidelines for uninsured mortgages, meaning people putting less than 10% down, or insured mortgages, actually. CMHC insured mortgages putting less than 20% down, so 15 or 10%. I think you can even get as low as 5. Was capped at $1 million. They raised that to 1.5 million, and in tandem with that, they lowered the amortization, or they increased the amortization from 25 to 30 years. So they went from $1 million to 1.5 million, and they went from 25 to 30-year amortization, opening up a whole new class of buyer, generally high-income buyers with not having the ability to actually put a large down payment down. So the ability to sustain higher payments without the ability or willingness, perhaps, to put down a large down payment. And so that really isn't going to help every buyer out there trying to get into the freehold market. However, this little niche cachet has really been driving up the price point in Toronto, in 416 downtown city center Toronto, because anything from 1.2 to 1.4 right now, since actually December, has really, really been on fire. And a lot of people who are at that 1-2 price point have literally been priced out of the market. And we've seen this happen to several of our own clients who are on really tight budgets trying to get into the housing market, the low-rise market, just get pushed out. And so this is something to watch, because all you need is another 50 extra buyers in the downtown market looking for these scarce semi-detached homes and row homes. And that's just going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the market. And that's the first place I think we're going to see a bit of a turnaround. And we are starting to see how that puts downward pressure on affordability into the condo market, especially the larger units, is I think going to be the next part of the market that's going to start to turn around. The larger condos, not the investors, not the one bedrooms, not the studios. Those are going to probably struggle for some time. But these larger condos, in tandem with first-time buyer freehold, I think is where you're going to see the strongest opportunities for price appreciation and increased competition in 2025.
Agreed. So just to give a little more extra context to this, if you're a seller or an owner that lives in a semi-detached and are looking to move up the property ladder to a detached, this might be a really good time for you to look at selling moving towards the spring. And if you are a condo owner looking to move into this category, A, is your condo saleable depending on its size and what it is and what building you're in and all of that expectations. Moving into this category is a hard leap to make because you've got to sell your condo and then move into a very competitive category at the same time. So those are kind of the two scenarios.
And for context, we probably had, I'd say, close to a dozen consults in January with clients or people just calling in who either live in a smaller condo or own a small investment condo, asking about, is this the right time to sell? And the answer to that question is absolutely not.
Yeah.
Contrary to what some of the statements on this channel in the comment sections have been about greedy realtors always trying to make a sale, this is not the right time to sell. And it's not even a question of selling. It's a question of even just getting people showings in the door in this category. And I think it will be some time for this to play out. And so if you own in this category, again, our strongest recommendation, especially if you look at the charts that show what is coming in the pipeline in 2025, 2028, 2029, and 2030, we're going down to zero new product coming in the pipeline. And that is going to be here for about 4 to 5 years before it can even start to think about changing, because it takes so long in the sales and construction and process and approval pipeline to get new shovels in the ground for new projects that this will turn around. It's just, you just have to be patient. I know there's a lot of people who are cash flow negative, especially those on variables, but the rates are coming down, which is good news. So smaller condos, smaller investors, just hold the line. Better days are coming. And if you own a larger condo, then you could be in a better situation later on this year to sell.
I agree. And I like to say that 2030 is my target date for just everything being better. Like I'm holding on to 2030. Like everything's just going to feel so much better by 2030.
I think we're going to have singularity with AI. And I think we're going to break longevity escape velocity. And those could be a conversation maybe for another podcast. But if you're watching, 2030 is the year.
2030, let's go. I can do 5 more years. I can do it.
You got it. You got it, Corey.
Active listings. So as we mentioned off the top of the podcast, active listings are the new fun stuff. Oh no, active listings are what's sitting on the market, collecting dust. Excuse me there. So again, we're comparing the last 5 years. I just think these graphs are hilarious. And every time I look at graphs like this, I always feel like they're just like abstract art. And like these are obviously so responsive to interest rates as well. So active listings in the market, January 2020 to January 2025, we see huge amount more sitting. Okay. So detached, 65% sitting. Semi-detached, 197% sitting, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron as to what we said when we were talking about the former slide. But I do want us to focus on semi-detached as we move through the year because it 100% will be a hot category. Row houses up 167% versus 5 years ago. We're comparing, and condos up 278% versus 5 years ago. So less people are buying condos than they were 5 years ago. And you can also see here the purple line, which is the top line in this abstract piece of art graph here. That top line in, as we're heading into COVID, you can see how many people were like, get me out of my condo, right? Like there was just like, everyone was like, get me out of my condo. I need to move to the 905, or I need to move to a cottage, or I need to get out of this like germ infested building, or I don't want to be stuck in a box for the next 2 years locked in. So you can see why there was this huge run up, but then you can also
and then you can see right at the top is when the Bank of Canada governor said we're not even thinking about raising interest rates till 2025. If you have any capacity to borrow, go buy something, go make an investment. And then you see that come straight down. It's almost been the most responsive to all the effery that's been going on.
And it was just the most insane time because, and we've talked about this as well, you know, a lot of our friends and family are all at home, like baking sourdough bread, watching Netflix. Like they were all, I don't know, doing home workouts off of like virtual workout classes. And then every Toronto agent was running around practically in a hazmat suit with like gloves and hand sanitizers. And we're like showing properties non-stop. Like we are like battling people for keys and people's front lawns. Like it was just terror out there. It was insane. But the best part about it was the fact there was no freaking traffic in Toronto at all. And you could just zip around from like one showing to the other in 5 seconds versus now we're like, okay, I've got to go to Leslieville. I think I should probably leave an hour before just to make sure I get there on time because you're just grinding it out from west to east or east to west. So it was just I wish it was all documented. I really wish somebody did like the Toronto real estate market during COVID as like a documentary because I think there would be some insane stories behind the scenes. Okay, so does this give you a general sense of where we are? So we have more
a little different than selling Sunset, wouldn't you say?
Very different. You know I love to talk about that. However, I did do my hair and makeup just for the podcast today.
Looking good. Well put together.
Yes. So it's not always the case. But whenever we do videos, which is something that Ralph has to hear me bitch about all the time, I'm like, it's not fair. You get to just do a video and just go on whenever. And I'm like, I have to wash my hair and dry it and do makeup and blah, blah, blah. So this is a chance for the audience out there to know that I feel like it's not the same for a female to go on camera as it is for a man.
Agreed.
Thank you. I wonder if that is why less women do video in real estate than men, because it's such a pain. That's my theory.
Let's look into it.
All right. Average days on market. How long is it taking things to sell? Again, we're comparing the last 5 years, and you can see that the buyer sentiment is constantly responding to things that are happening. The major driver of this insane graph is interest rates. Buyers are responding to interest rates. Interest rates affect sentiment. Once sentiment is affected, it changes the psychology. Once one buyer that you know wants to buy, then their friend wants to buy, and their friend wants to buy, and then that's when FOMO starts. So it's like this weird thing where when people want to buy, it's like everybody wants to be part of the herd. If everyone's buying, then everyone's buying. If people are retracting, then everyone starts to retract. And you see this ebb and flow. And it's such a psychological mind F in terms of buying and selling real estate. And then add and layer into that all the bullshit from the media, which is just freaking confusing for anyone who's trying to make sense of it all. And so you're just always seeing this response mechanism. And people are like, should I wait? Because the market might crash. Should I buy? Because I might not ever be able to buy at this price point again. So these constant questions, push and pull all the time. And so I can completely relate to this. And I remember the first few real estate transactions I was involved in as a buyer myself. I remember buying, and then like the next day something came out in Blog TO when I was like convinced I was like the market was going to crash. So you can see that very much here. just in terms of how the graph looks. And you can see in the table on the bottom right of this chart that things are taking longer to sell than they did 5 years ago, which is just not shocking, considering everything the market has gone through. Condos being the one I really want to highlight here, that it's taking 90% longer for a condo to sell than it did pre-COVID. And when we talk a little bit more about inventory, you'll see why on the next slide. So there's just way more supply and opportunities out there for buyers.
What's interesting is I bet you if you could chart out my EKG from 2020 to 25, I think it would match this chart.
Oh my gosh, I think mine would look like this for just January 2025.
Yeah.
There was a few times I was like, Ralph, I think I'm having a panic attack right now. Like, that's how crazy it got. All right. So this is inventory. Very, very helpful to look at this. Okay. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I can put the slides into the link below so that you can see this, because I think this will really help you understand what the market looks like. And this is exactly what you need to see. You need to see the increase of inventory. There is way more out there for buyers to look at, and actually zero sense of FOMO, or fear of missing out, because they know there's more coming and there's more opportunity to compare to other things. So you can see, again, the top driver of this number is condos, the purple line at the top. Like, that's a lot of inventory. In fact, we have 400% more inventory than we did before COVID in condos. We have 300% more row houses than we did pre-COVID, 139% more semis to look at pre-COVID, and 95% more detached than we did pre-COVID. So more inventory. Again, to go back to rough sentiment, this is a supply and demand scenario. And then we've also got to add in, it's not just really about inventory right now. It's about people being like, what the hell is happening? We have no government. There is no parliament in session right now. As an example, people are freaking out about the tariffs. As an example, people are worried about unemployment. As an example, people are worried about what's happening to our cities. There's just so much. People are worried about immigration. People are worried about crime. There's just all of this stuff is going on. So not only is it a supply and demand issue, this is like an overarching concern about the direction of everything right now. So we hear you. And if you want to talk about it with us anytime, we're basically real estate therapists at this point, right?
And macroeconomists, economists.
Well, you are.
Someone is. I don't know where. We try to be.
Maker.
But it's just really interesting to see this, because you realize how many forces have been pulling the market. But also, as interesting as the last while has been, I also feel the most optimistic I've actually ever felt. And when I look back at 2018 and 2019, and it's weird because when people talk about time or the last decade, now everything has become pre-COVID or post-COVID. It's such an interesting thing, the way people now look at time, because we were a different world, a different culture before COVID as we are now. And when I look at 2018 and 2019, nobody was walking around going, so great to have stability. It's so great not to care about a Bank of Canada rate announcement, or to want to listen to a speech by a politician somewhere in the world, here or anywhere else. It's so great to not be thinking about massive health concerns. Just unbelievable to think that how much we took for granted. And I do think, more so than I have in a long time, that things are getting better and things will get better, and we will hit a bit of a baseline stability. I think there's going to be a little turbulence over the short term. But long term, 2030 is not that far away. And I do think if you look at the advancements of technology and AI and just all the things that are out there and coming forward, I do feel like we're out of the woods. It'll be a little bumpy for a while, especially out of the US. And I think a lot of shifts are going to be happening, but everything is a pendulum, and we're trying to seek its center. And I do think that we've swung one way now, back another way, and I think we'll move to the center, and I think that stability will come. And maybe that's me just being super optimistic and hopeful, but I feel better about the future than I have in a long time. And I feel better about the midterm prospects of the Toronto real estate market. Again, the short term might be a bit bumpy, but it will start to we will start to see a trend line moving up, I think, sooner rather than later, especially in certain segments.
Well, I love when you're an optimist because I'm already naturally an optimist. So if you are,
Yes,
and that just bumps up my optimism. So thank you for that.
exactly.
A couple things just on this chart quickly. I want to acknowledge that I want to talk anecdotally for a second. Just if you look at the bottom of this graph, I just want to prove that we were hovering around that 1 month's worth of supply or under that in that very hairy, insane time period. Just as Ralph mentioned it, that we were working in that like 3 weeks of supply. And you can see that here on this graph when all the lines come together around 2021. That's when things were just insane. And we had absolutely zero selection out there for buyers, and things were selling with like 30 offers. I just want to show you that visually here. And the second thing is that we've had a lot of listings, not a lot, but we've had quite a few listings coming to market in January. And in fact, and this is just again, just to give you a peek behind the curtain, because the data doesn't always tell you what's happening. And it was a little bit of a risk to list some places in January, knowing that it's just generally slower for the reasons that we've already discussed. We did have a detached house get listed in Midtown last week. The house was a beautiful character home. It did need a lot of work in terms of the fact that it needed some repairs behind the walls. So things like knob and tube wiring, some waterproofing, some roof, like all that stuff that's not very sexy. But in the price category that this hovered, which was just under that $2 million mark, there was almost 100 private showings in a week and almost 100 people attending the open houses on the weekend. So that's like 200. Of course, people are repeating. Okay, so I'm not saying that all of these are unique buyers every time, but we had about 200 people plus or minus through over a 1 week period with 10 offers on the property 2 days ago, and for it selling higher, much higher than the list price, which of course was in marketing number. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was at the open house on Saturday and Ralph was there on Sunday. And it was just interesting to see all of these people coming through that were very interested in the area and this style of house, but also that this price point seemed effortless to them. And any of these threats of tariffs or anything that people were concerned about, sort of in the general social media or mainstream media world, were not top of mind for anyone searching in this particular location or price category. And so I just found that really interesting is that there's buyers out there that can afford these houses. And that's likely due to the fact that they have parents that can help them out or inheritance of some kind, or they have really well-paying jobs. But I was just like, this was not phasing anyone out there. And so that property did exceptionally well. And then we also had a huge house out in Oakville, which isn't an area that we normally work in. We were connected to this lovely couple who have a massive house out there. And that house sold within a week. It's still conditional right now, but lots of interest on the house.
And still, we're getting calls from agents. If it doesn't go through, we want to offer on it. Again, like not the type of energy we were expecting for January in this type of environment. With these two properties, it definitely feels like 2022 kind of energy and vibes, which is, again, just anecdotal, but we are seeing it. We have 3 other houses that came to market this week, 2 houses and a luxury penthouse, actually, all of which has been getting an extreme amount of interest and showings.
Yeah. So I think that's something I just wanted to bring it up because I want to see what the February numbers look like. And I just want buyers and sellers to know how kind of we're feeling behind the scenes because the data only tells you so much. And it's sometimes these instincts that they're really give us the impetus to consult with our buyers and sellers about how to move forward. It's more like the niggle than it is about the data, or it's a combination of the both. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that.
It's been surprising. Like it's not something we were anticipating. So this does not make a trend. This is anecdotal information. But we are talking about a property in Midtown, a property in Oakville, a property in the Junction, a property in Etobicoke, and a penthouse in downtown Toronto. And we also sold an investment property with a multi-unit property right at the beginning of January.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so it is kind of a dichotomy of everything but one bedrooms, one plus dens, and studios. Smaller units we're not putting to market right now, but everything else, surprisingly, even in the face of some of the numbers we saw for January, seem to be doing well. And yes, we consider ourselves to be great marketers, but the energy and the conversations and just the overall vibes has been really positive in the face of everything. So we'll see if this continues, but it is really interesting to note. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, Corey.
Good. I'm glad we talked about it. And then let's just finish off today's session talking about prices because we all know that's what everybody wants to see. So I saved the best for last, of course. And again, this is so interesting. So we're comparing the last 5 years. And you would think, and we've talked about this before, with everything we've gone through in Toronto over the last 5 years, just think about it for a second, including a global pandemic and everything shutting down and interest rates just going up and then coming down and everything we've already talked about on former podcasts, you would think you would see a massive correction here. Massive. And yes, prices aren't as high as they were at the height of the market. Totally acknowledging that for any troll that is going to write that to me in the comment section. I get it. But we are still up on every category in terms of average price sold. Up almost 12% in detached houses, which is the most expensive category out there. That includes your luxury homes as well. Like Drake's house would be included here if he was to sell his property, as an example. Semi-detached houses are up 14.5%. We're not really surprised there because we've talked about semis. Row houses or townhouses are up 13.5% versus 5 years ago with everything the market has thrown at it. And condos, up 5% versus last 5 years. And condos has just kind of just been like almost flat. Like it looks like it has no,
Shocking.
It doesn't even have a heartbeat. It's just like ticking along. Now, I really, 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 really want to make sure that you remember out of this podcast that this all sounds hunky-dory, but you have to remember how much inventory is out there that's not selling. So you got a massive amount of inventory, which translates over to active listings. So things that are rolling over month over month. So I do still think that there'll be more of a correction, not a crash, on certain categories and certain asset classes, because that's a lot of inventory out there, particularly in the condo segment.
One thing to keep in mind with that is a lot of that condo inventory that is sitting on the market are investors who are negative cash flow. Their units are tenanted. So their investment properties are tenanted. So they're saying, you know what, I'm short $500 a month. If I can get XYZ price, I'll sell it. But if I can't, I'll just keep the tenants in there. And that, I think, is adding a lot of weight to the amount of inventory that's out there because buyers who are looking at condos, especially the smaller condos, the studios and the one bedrooms, they're not going to want to buy a tenanted property because they have so much choice and there's so much uncertainty. Even if contractually the tenant has agreed to leave, they still may not. And those tenanted properties never show well because the tenant probably doesn't have great furniture to begin with. Sorry if you're a tenant out there. It's just the truth. And they're going to be very disincentivized to have it sell because then they'll be forced to move. So those are the properties that are really dragging down the market. In addition to a lot of these investor properties, the investors either weren't given good guideline when they were buying pre-construction or didn't understand how to read floor plans. And so a lot of these properties are just not the type of property that an end user, which is the only resale buyer out there in the condo market, is ever going to want to live in because they don't have to, because they can actually choose to purchase a condo right now that is vacant and has bright light and has an island, maybe a bedroom door with a balcony. All of those things out there are accessible to first-time condo buyers right now in vacant properties. So why would they buy a dimly lit, bad floor plan tenanted unit?
The Gardner Expressway.
They won't. And so there's a bit of a stalemate there. And only until things pick up and we get that demand, that supply crunch, which is coming. I mean, when you take a population of 7 million people in the GTA and nothing is coming new online, you're going to put a tremendous amount of pressure onto inventory. So that's coming. We're still probably a year or two away from there, but it is in the pipeline. So I think that's really that segment of investor segment in these investor condos that are tenanted is probably why you're seeing some of this drag where you have unsellable units, unreasonable expectations, and no motivation for the seller to have to sell. And rates are coming down, and banks are continuing to work with their clients and not try to put anybody into foreclosure or become sellers of last resort. So I think that's partially what you're seeing in the condo market. And again, it's just going to take a lot of time for all of this to play out.
Yep. Time. Not my favorite thing as somebody who's not the most patient, but we shall prevail. And I do agree, Ralph. I do feel optimistic about certain aspects of the market as well.
For sure.
Some really good things in the pipeline down the road, which I'm also thrilled about. So let's make a promise that we will regroup with all our viewership about these numbers in February.
I promise.
We promise, I promise. Let's pay attention to those inventory rates, the active listings. Let's revisit semi-detached houses. Maybe we'll take a little bit deeper dive into semis, and maybe we'll take a deeper dive into the condo category and just look at the breakdown of 2 bedrooms versus 1 bedrooms versus studios, just so that you as a viewer can understand those. Of course, if you're a buyer right now, I mean, there's deals to be had in the condo segment for sure. If you're looking to buy in the semi-detached category, get ready to roll up your sleeves and get to work and be really, really willing to have some balls and tenacity to get into those semis, because I think it's going to be hot, hot, hot. And we'll keep you apprised of what's happening boots on the ground as well when it comes to some of these listings that we have out there and the amazing activity that we've seen on, which is incredible.
Awesome. Well, thank you for putting together these charts today, Corey, and for being your charming, effervescent self. Appreciate having you here today. And the other thing I'd just like to say to some of the people who made comments in our comment section from last week's podcast in the YouTube comment section. But as you can see behind me, a lot of people were commenting how they were distracted by my pictures frames being off. So I did my best to readjust. I said I can do better, and I will continue to strive to do so. So thanks, everybody, so much for tuning in. Obviously, if you have any comments, any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. And please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. Thank you so much for joining the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Corey, any last words you'd like to leave us on?
I would like to hear from everybody if they agree with us, if the semi-detached category is going to take off in 2025. So if they want to pop their comments down below about that, I would love to hear your feedback. In addition to that, if there's anything that you want us to address in a future podcast when it comes to market statistics or a segment that you want us to look at in particular, drop it in the comments below. We really actually love hearing from you and your feedback. And Ralph and I are very open-minded to a different perspective on everything. So even if you don't agree with our forecast or some of the ideas that we put together here today, we're super open-minded to what you have to say too. We'd love to hear that. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.